Hi everyone, my name is NURFAQIHA NAJWA binti RAZALI. My student ID is 2024249018 and I'll be starting our presentation by giving a brief introduction to feminism. Feminism is the belief in the social, political and economic equality of the sexes. It's not about placing one gender above another. It's about creating fairness and equal opportunities for everyone. The purpose of feminism is to challenge gender-based inequalities and to advocate for rights and opportunities, especially for women who has been historically disadvantaged. Feminism has developed in four waves. The first wave, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, focused mainly on women's right to vote. The second wave, from the 1960s to 1980s, addressed issues like workplace discrimination, family roles, and reproductive rights. The third wave, in the 1990s to 2000, emphasized individuality and embraced diversity. And today, the fourth wave focuses on intersectionality, how gender intersects with race, class and sexuality, and uses social media to raise awareness and demand change. Feminism still matters today because we continue to face serious issues such as the gender pay gap hasn't been closed, gender-based violence is still widespread, women remain underrepresented in leadership roles, and societal stereotypes continue to limit both women and men. That's why feminism is not outdated, it's still very much needed.
My name is INTAN NURALEYSSA binti SAMSUL with student ID 2024634254. I will present about the main points of feminism theory in international relations. The first main point is gender as a social construct. In feminist international relations, gender is not just about biological sex. Instead, gender is a biologically, socially and politically created system of rules, behaviors and expectations placed on people based on their perceived sex. This means ideas like men are leaders or women are caregivers are not natural truths. They are created by society and repeated over time. International relations has traditionally focused on masculine norms like power, militarism, and realism. The theories often equate masculinity with war, strength, and rationality, while femininity is associated with emotion, care, and passivity. This dualism marginalizes women and feminizes roles in state security discourses, like women as protected, men as protectors. This, according to feminist theories, ignores the views, contributions, and experiences of women in global politics. For instance, traditional international relations theories like realism and liberalism assume the state as a masculine actor, like soldiers associated with men are seen as patriots, while caregivers associated with women are excluded from security considerations. The next point is intersectional approach. This approach in feminist international relations recognizes that gender inequality is shaped by other systems of power like race, class, ethnicity, age, geography, and more. In other words, women are not all the same, and their experiences of international politics are affected by multiple overlapping factors, not just their gender. This idea directly challenges traditional international relations, which often treats women as one uniform group or ignores gender altogether. Traditional international relations focuses on state power, war, and diplomacy, which are dominated by male perspectives and often ignore how policies impact different types of women differently. It recognizes that not all women experience global politics the same way. Feminist international relations scholars argue that to understand global issues like war, development, or migration, we must also consider how these issues affect people differently based on intersecting identities. For instance, refugee women in conflict zones. About 80% of refugees are women and children. They face gender-specific threats like sexual violence and forced prostitution, in addition to general dangers like hunger or displacement. A gender-neutral refugee policy fails to protect them adequately.
Hi, my name is NABILAH binti SHUHAIMI and my student ID is 2024214274. Now I will continue the main points of feminism theory. The third main point of feminism theory in international relations is critique of male dominance. The field of IR has long been dominated by male perspective, particularly rooted in Western Anglo-European academic traditions. Much of what we study in traditional IR concepts like sovereignty, war, power and security has been defined and discussed through what we can call a masculine lens. This lens tends to emphasize competitions, aggression, military strength and political dominance. As a result, alternative voices, especially those of women and other marginalized groups, have often been excluded or overlooked. Feminist scholars argue that this male-dominated view not only limits our understanding of global issues, but also preserves gender inequalities within both theory and practice. The last main point is reimagining power and security. Feminist theory steps in to challenge these traditional definitions. Instead of viewing power only in terms of dominance, control, or military, feminists encourage us to think more broadly and inclusively. They produce the idea of power with rather than power over, meaning power can also come from collaboration, empathy, collective strength. Emotional labor, care work, and social cooperation, typically undervalued in mainstream international relations, are brought to the forefront as essential components of how societies function and maintain peace. When it comes to security, feminists argue that it shouldn't just be about defending borders or deterring threats with weapons. True security includes freedom from domestic violence, access to healthcare and education, economic justice, and respect for human dignity. By reimagining power and security in this way, feminist theory opens up new pathways for understanding and solving global problems, not just from a state-centered or militarized viewpoint, but from a human-centered perspective.
Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. My name is Raja Muhammad Adimi Adam bin Raja Muhammad TAZERI. My student ID is 20248459Y8. Now let's move on to the analysis of feminist theory. This section is where we dive deeper into its foundations, explore its types and critically examine its strengths and weaknesses. Feminist theory has reshaped the way we understand global politics and international relations by introducing gender as a core concept. It challenges traditional, male-dominated perspective and brings attention to often overlooked issues like women's roles in war, peace and diplomacy. However, like any theory, it has its complexities and limitations. To start, I will discuss the foundation of feminist theory and how it emerged as a response to traditional approach in international relations. Then we will look at the various types of feminism and conclude with a critical examination of its weakness. Feminist theory emerged in the 1980s as part of critical and post-positivist theories. It was developed in response to the limitations of traditional international relations theories, such as realism, which were criticized for being male-dominated and overly focused on the state as the main actor. One of the key contributions of feminist theory is its introduction of gender as a social construct rather than a biological fact. This approach allowed scholars to address and challenge male bias in academic theories. Feminist theories aim to incorporate women's experience and perspective into the conversation and rebuild these theories with gender as a central concept. The theory also questions existing ideas of power, security and justice from a feminist perspective. For instance, it challenged the assumption that power must always be about dominance and control. Finally, feminist theory seeks to bring attention to the often overlooked roles that women play in areas like war, peace, diplomacy and development.
Assalamualaikum. My name is SITI ALYSSA binti SHADAN. My student ID is 2024271322. Today I will present about the analysis on theory for types of feminism. So as you can see on the slides, there are three types of feminism. So the first one is liberal feminism. Liberal feminism focuses on achieving gender equality through gradual political and legal reforms within the current system. It advocates for women's access to education, fair employment, opportunities and representation in government. A key example is the women's suffrage movement, which fought for and eventually secured voting rights for women in many countries. In more recent times, liberal feminists have worked close to gender pay gap, enforce anti-discrimination laws in workplaces, and promote maternity leave policies. For instance, the Equal Pay Act 1963 in the United States was a major legal milestone for liberal feminists aiming to ensure women receive the same pay for the same work as men. So the second point is radical feminism. So radical feminism goes beyond legal reforms and targets the root causes of gender inequality by challenging patriarchy, a system where men hold power and women are largely excluded. It critiques how patriarchy is deeply embedded in institutions such as the family, religion, media, and also education. Radical feminists often focus on issues like domestic violence, sexual assault, and reproductive rights, emphasizing that these problems are symptoms of a broader patriarchal system. For example, the Me Too movement highlighted how sexual harassment is a systemic issue rather than just isolated incidents, aligning with radical feminist perspective. They also question traditional gender roles and advocate for a complete restructuring of society to eliminate male dominance. So the third point is socialist feminism. Socialist feminism sees the struggle for gender inequality as inseparable from the fight against capitalism. It argues that capitalism and patriarchy work together to exploit both labor and gender roles, keeping women economically dependent and marginalized. For example, women are often overrepresented in low-paying, undervalued jobs like caregiving, cleaning, or service works, which reflects both gender and class inequalities. Socialist feminists advocate for state-supported childcare, universal healthcare, and paid parental leave as ways to reduce these burdens. Movements such as the Fight for $15, a campaign for a higher minimum wage, often included a feminist angle, as many minimum wage workers are women, especially women of color. So next, I will explain about the strength of feminism. So the first point is exposes gender bias in traditional IR. Feminist approaches to international relations IR challenge the idea that IR is a neutral or objective field. They argue that traditional theories like realism and liberalism are shaped by masculine assumptions that emphasize power, control, and state sovereignty. By revealing these gender biases, feminist IR shows how key concepts such as security, power, and diplomacy are rooted in male-dominated perspective. For example, while traditional IR focuses on military threats, feminist IR highlights human security, such as the risks women face in war zones like sexual violence or displacement. This broadens our understanding of what truly threatens individuals and communities. The second point is highlights women's experiences. Traditional IR often overlooks women's contributions and the unique challenges they face. Feminist IR brings visibility to women's lives experiences in areas such as conflict, migration, diplomacy, and also peace building. For instance, women are frequently involved in grassroots peace movements, yet they are rarely included in formal peace negotiations. A notable example is the UN Resolution 1325, which calls for increased participation of women in conflict resolution and peacekeeping missions. By centering women's voices, feminist IR ensures that global policies reflect the realities of all people, not just those in positions of power. The last point is promote social and political changes. Feminist IR is not just descriptive, it's normative, meaning it seeks to change the world for the better. It aims to create a more just and equitable international system by challenging inequality, discrimination, and also exclusion. This includes pushing for gender-sensitive policies in diplomacy, development aid, and international law. For example, feminist scholars and activists advocate for inclusive foreign policy, like Sweden's feminist foreign policy, which prioritizes gender equality in all international efforts. By combining theory with action, feminist IR helps shape more ethical, inclusive, and also peaceful global relations.
Now, let's take a closer look at some of the key weaknesses of feminist theory. While the theory has made groundbreaking contributions, it is not without its challenges and limitations. First, feminist theory is often criticized for having a Western-centric perspective. This means it tends to generalize the experience of Western women while overlooking the cultural difference and unique struggles faced by women in other parts of the world. This critique points to the need for a more inclusive and globally representative approach. Secondly, the theory lacks a unified framework, unlike realism or liberalism, which have clear and structured foundations. Feminist theory is more diverse and fragmented, While this diversity allows for a wide range of perspective, it can also make the theory less cohesive and harder to apply consistently in academic and practical contexts. Lastly, there is a limited focus on class and intersectional analysis. Feminist theory does not always adequately address the differences between women based on factors like economic class, race, or regional context. For example, the challenge faced by wealthy women in urban settings can be very different from those of poor women in rural areas, and these distinctions are sometimes overlooked.
Hi, my name is NURALEYSSA NATASYA binti KAMARIZAN. My student ID is 2024-664766. Today I will present about impact toward international relation. First, feminist theory says that gender is very important to understand international relation. Before this, most IR topics only look from men's side. Feminist theory challenged this and asked, what about women experience? They said we need to think about how international issues also affect women, not just men. Traditional theories like realism are to focus on male views, and feminist theory criticized that. Next, feminist theory also changed how we understand power and security in IR. Usually, IR will focus on army, war, and protecting the country. But feminist scholars say power and security is not only about military. They introduce women security, which is about people's safety in daily life like economy, health, and feeling safe. Feminist theory also said that normal security studies always forget about how women feel unsafe, especially in war areas. Lastly, feminist theory shows that foreign policy is always decided by men using male thinking. Women's opinions are usually left out. Studies also shows that women leaders are more likely to care about human rights and less likely to support war. That's why feminist theory says women should be more involved in making decisions to make foreign policy more fair and caring. So, in conclusion, feminist theory has given new ideas to international relations by focusing on gender, changing how we think about security, and showing the gender bias in foreign policy.
To summarize, feminism in international relations focuses on achieving gender equality in global politics. It challenged traditional IR theories like realism and liberalism, which have historically been male-dominated and excluded women's perspective. The theory has evolved through 4 waves of feminism, each addressing different aspects of gender inequality. Key concepts include understanding gender as a social construct, applying intersectionality to account for difference in women's experiences, and reimagining the concept of power to include care, work, well-being, and emotional labor. There are several types of feminist theories such as liberal feminism, which pushes for equal legal rights, radical feminism, which critiques patriarchy at a deeper structural level, and socialist feminism, which links gender inequality to economic systems. Feminism in IR has strengths such as revealing gender bias, introducing new analytical lenses, and encouraging social change. However, it also faces challenges, including a Western-centric focus and a lack of a unified theoretical structure. Still, feminist IR has made significant contributions. It has brought gender to the forefront of international analysis, redefined what power and security mean, and revealed how foreign policy often reflects gendered assumptions. In conclusion, feminist theory reshapes international relations by promoting inclusivity, equality, and people-centered approach. It challenges patriarchal structures that have long influenced global politics and gives a voice to those who have been underrepresented or ignored. Despite its criticisms, feminism remains relevant and necessary in today's world, where gender inequality still exists in many forms, from leadership gaps to violence and discrimination. By integrating feminist perspective, IR becomes a more just, balanced, and reflective field, better equipped to understand and respond to the real-world issues that affect people of all genders.